Today I'm going to tell you how to build a distributed log manager with RDMA and show you how you can achieve decentralization and avoid starvation at the same time. So my name is Dong Young, and this is a joint work with Musharraf Chowdhury and my advisor Bazan Mozaffari. So before we start, let me tell you a little bit about log manager first. So log manager is main mechanism for ensuring consistency in almost any stateful distributed systems like distributed databases and file systems. It is used for serializability, isolation, and it also used to prevent starvations. Now, the distributed log managers are well studied in traditional systems, but most modern networks come with RDMA capabilities. And here, a research question is how we can build a significantly better distributed log manager with RDMA. So in traditional TCP/IP network, both CPU need to work in order to transfer data between the two nodes. In RDMA, the local node actually can directly read or write to remote node's memory while bypassing its CPU. Now, many of modern high-performance network vendors like InfiniBand support this protocol. Now, RDMA actually offers a much lower latency and near-zero CPU utilization compared to traditional TCP/IP network. So from here on, we will be focusing on this single question, how we can utilize these modern networks to redesign distributed log managers. So let me give you a little bit of background on how distributed log managers, or DLMs, work. So there are two types, centralized and decentralized. And in a centralized distributed log manager, when you need a resource, you actually need to talk to the remote log manager hosting that resource to get a log. And in a decentralized log manager, on the other hand, you can actually directly grab the log on the object that you need. Now, in a centralized log manager, they have all the knowledge of all the logs for the resource they hosting, so they can be starvation-free and also have a low tail latency. However, all the log requests need to go through that single centralized log manager, so it can be slow, and each log manager becomes a single point of failure. Now, on the other hand, decentralized log managers, they're significantly faster than centralized log managers, and they don't have single point of failure. But since they don't have this single governing entity handling all the logs, so they are very prone to starvation, which result in very, very long tail latency. So with RDMA, our goal here is to actually come up with a distributed log manager that can combine the best of both two worlds. So here I'm going to explain why all the existing RDMA-based log managers are actually suffering from starvation. So in RDMA, there are three types of operation. So there are two-sided operations, send and receive, which must be matched by both sender and receiver. There are one-sided operations, where you can actually read and write the remote node's memory directly while bypassing its CPU. Now, third type is atomic operation with the compare and swap and fetch and add, which also bypass remote node's CPU. And these type of operation also have this useful characteristic of avoiding data races. So because of this, almost every existing RDMA-based distributed log managers heavily rely on these atomic operations. Now, there are two limitations, though. So they avoid data races only among atomic operations themselves. So this means you cannot mix them with the other types of operations. And also, they only operate on 64 bits at a time. Now, these two limitations actually have very significant implications on how you design a log manager with RDMA. And as a matter of fact, it's one of these two atomic operations is actually the culprit of starvation in existing RDMA-based distributed log managers. So why is that? So as I mentioned, there are two types of atomic operations. The first one is fetch and add. So this operation takes two arguments. So here x is the memory location, and 3 is the value to be added. So in this example, here this operation will simply add 3 to x, making it 3. And the operation will return the previous value of x, which is 0. Now the second operation is compare and swap. This operation takes 3 arguments. So x, again, is the memory location. And 0 is value to be compared, and 3 is the new value. So here again, this operation sees x is 0, so it will change it to 3. And similar to fetch and add, it will return the previous value, which is x. Now suppose this case, x is not 0, so it is in fact 1. So in this case, what happens is this operation will simply fail and just return the previous value of x, which is 1. So the main problem here is all previous distributed log managers primarily use compare and swap. And it causes, the problem here is this heavy use of compare and swap causes blind retries and starvation, which in turn results in terrible performance. So from here, let me explain why compare and swap actually lead to blind retries and starvation. So do you remember how I mentioned that all the atomic operations operate on 64 bits? So this is a very popular, very common way of how existing RDMA-based DLM actually represent both exclusive and shared locks on the same object. So they usually divide these 64 bits into 2 halves. So first half is exclusive part containing ID of current writer, and second half is the shared part, which has number of current readers. So let's suppose this example. So we have this writer with ID 2 who wants to grab an exclusive lock on this object L, which already has 10 shared locks. Now this writer does not know this situation. So what happens is that this writer will try to change the value of L from 00 to 20 using compare and swap. And obviously this is going to fail because the equality does not hold. So from here, this writer can actually queue himself by changing the value of L to 210 from 010. But again, this can fail because number of shared locks in the system can change. It could go up and down. So what happens here is that writer does these blind retries, wasting CPU and network bandwidth. At the same time, stop from getting this resource. So we actually call this situation reader-writer starvation, and this leads to very long tail latency. And in the paper, we also talk about another type of starvation, which is fast, slow starvation. Now here is how our proposed approach, which is called DSRR, or Decentralized and Starvation-Free Lock Management with RDMA, solves these problems. So here we are proposing to design a locking protocol that can be implemented primarily using fetch and add instead of compare and swap. And the key main idea behind this algorithm, which I'm going to explain a little bit later, is to adapt LAMPO's traditional bakery algorithm to database setting in RDMA context. So by doing so, we achieve first fully distributed and decentralized RDMA-based log manager without starvation. So let's take a brief look at LAMPO's bakery algorithm. So LAMPO's algorithm essentially models a bakery. So when you enter this bakery, you will get a ticket with the number on it. So in this case, you have the ticket with the number 15. And as the baker finishes serving other customers, the number at the counter will increase. And as soon as you see that your number is up at the counter, you can finally go to the baker and place your orders. So here, the customers are equivalent to the threads in an application, and the baker can be seen as a shared resource. So this algorithm provides fairness, which in turn eliminates starvation. So now we are ready to talk about our algorithm, DSRR. So here is the overview of it. So as I mentioned, it adapts bakery algorithm, and it is implemented with the fetch and add plus one-side reads. And we use different log object representation from existing DLM. So here we divide 64 bits into 4 16-bit segments where upper 32 bits are called counter, which is basically the counter number in the bakery. And lower 32 bits are called max, which essentially stores the next ticket number you will receive upon entering the bakery. So with this representation, let me walk you through how our algorithm works. So here is how DSLR works basically. So first, you increment the max value of a log object with the fetch and add to obtain a ticket. And you will wait till counter number equals to your ticket numbers. After that, you can acquire the log, and you can proceed with the resource. And once you are done with the object, you can simply increment the counter value with the, again, fetch and add to release the log. So here is an example. So here, transaction 2 tries to acquire an exclusive log on this object L. So here, transaction 2 will use fetch and add to increment the exclusive max value by 1. And doing so, you'll get a ticket with the value 0041. And at this point, you know that there are 4 exclusive logs and 1 shared log in the system just by looking at this ticket. So as a result of this fetch and add, the value of L becomes 0051. At this point, the transaction 2 will wait until all previous logs leave the system. So to do that, it actually needs to continuously read the value of L, but with DSLR, we use the technique called dynamic interval polling to do that efficiently. And I will talk about this technique a little bit later. So once all previous logs leave the system, it can proceed with L. And once it is done with the object, it can actually increment the counter to release the object. Now, here is the second example. So now transaction 2 tries to acquire shared log on the object. So similarly, it used fetch and add, this time adding the shared max value and get this ticket. But here, as soon as it sees there are only shared logs in the system, it can straight to grab the log and proceed with the object. And similarly, once it is done, it uses fetch and add to increment the shared counter to release the log. So these previous examples actually assume that everyone follows this protocol correctly. But natural question here is what happens when one of the transactions actually fail to release log. So there can be hard failures like node failures, or soft failures like deadlocks. So to handle these kinds of failures, DSL uses releases. So one thing to note here is that there is no need for synchronized clock in the system because least expiration can be determined with the local clock. So in this example, suppose you are waiting on this object L, and by monitoring these counter values, DSLR can actually determine the least expiration with the local clock by checking the last time any log on L has been released. So once the lease gets expired, any subsequent transaction can actually come in and reset this counter with compare and swap, which allows all other transactions to actually come in and retry and grab the log and proceed. So how DSLR actually checks these counter values efficiently? So as I mentioned, DSLR uses a technique called dynamic interval polling. So basically, it polls an object value with the interval that's equal to default interval times number of logs in the system. So this default interval value can actually be tuned, but a systematical way of setting this value is the minimum time required to release a log, so which is basically the latency of single RDMA atomic operation in the system. Now, DSLR uses the ticket numbers and also counter values to calculate the number of logs in the system, and our experiments have shown that it reduces the network overhead by more than half. Now, in the paper, we actually also have the theoretical proof that DSLR is actually starvation-free. I'm not going into details about the proof here. Instead, I will going to show you some empirical results on DSLR. So for experimental setup, we used 32 nodes from Cloud Labs APT cluster, which were connected by InfiniBand. So we used one set of nodes as a distributed log managers, and another separate set as a clients. And each client had 4 worker threads to generate transactions. And there were 4 baseline algorithms. We implemented traditional centralized log manager and also 3 other RDMA-based / compare and swap-based decentralized DLMs. So for the workloads, we ran TPCC benchmark with the two scenarios, low and high contention scenarios. And in the paper, we also ran our own set of micro benchmarks with various parameters. But here, we're going to focus on TPCC workload. So here is the throughput result with the TPCC workload. So y-axis is the transaction throughput, and x-axis is DSLR and 4 other baselines. So here, the graph shows that our algorithm actually achieves 1.8 to 2.5 times higher throughput on the high contention. And interestingly, even under low contention scenarios, DSLR actually performs better than all the other baselines. And here are the latency graphs. So left graph is average latency graph, and right graph is 99.9% tail latency graph. And in each graph, x-axis is the 4 baselines, and y-axis here is the DSLR's improvement over each of these baselines. Again, DSLR achieves 1.9 to 2.5 times lower average latency, and up to 46.7 times lower tail latency on the high contention scenario. So to sum it up, DSLR is the first RDMA-based, fully decentralized and distributed log manager that bounds tail latency and avoids starvation. And the key idea is that it adapts Lambus Bakery algorithm to a transactional database setting and an RDMA context. And it also detects and resolves failure with releases. And finally, our experimental result has shown that it achieves higher throughput and drastically lower tail latency than any existing RDMA-based DLM. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
We have some time for questions.
Hi, thank you for your talk.
Thank you.
I'm interested in the CAS reset on failure. So do you need to decide which node does the CAS reset, or can multiple nodes do the CAS reset, or how does
so
this
as
work?
soon as any of the nodes or any of DLM detects failure situation, it can use the compare swap to reset.
Mm-hmm. And can it happen that multiple nodes reach the timeout at around the same time, so the CAS reset happens multiple times?
Right, but as soon as, so the beauty of this mechanism is that as long as one of them resets the counter, they can actually, the ODRs can actually see that and continue with the object.
Okay, thank you.
Interesting algorithm. But now you use quite small counters, like 16
right.
bits, 16 bits counters.
That's the
and
question.
You have like 100,000.
So actually, we have a mechanism to handle such cases. So it's only 16 bits, so it will overflow, right?
Yeah.
So what we have is that we use the 16th most significant bit as a canary bit, and as soon as the algorithm sees that one of the counters reaches the limit, what happens is that when you release the lock, the DSLR is responsible for reset the entire counter to 0.
But how do the other clients know that this is happening?
So at this point, when suppose there's another transaction came in and tries to increment the value, shared max value, and as soon as it sees that it goes over the 32K limit, what they do is they will undo their batch and add by adding -1, and they will do the hands-off. I'll wait till I'll wait a little bit until it gets reset. So.
There is no chance that they will actually be so slow that they will fall in a situation that they do not detect it.
Could you elaborate your question? Okay. Yeah. I can talk about it.
So modern RDMA-based database systems have shown to scale up to multiple millions of transactions. Now you showed your log manager can do 100,000s of transactions only. Maybe you can comment on that, how you would scale out to those scenarios?
So here, actually, in this work, we actually focused on contention scenarios, and we actually haven't looked at much about how we actually scale up, but in the paper we actually have the scalability experiments as well. So it shows that it scales almost linearly as you add more nodes. So does that? Yeah.
Final question.
Okay, thanks for your talk. So I'm just wondering, so what makes you guys implement the ticket log style distributed log manager instead of using the MCS style? Because it seems to me that the ticket log is at least, the MCS log is at least as efficient as a ticket log, even when the contention is high. Thank you.
So actually, I'm not too aware about MCS logs, so.
So MCS log is it's a cache efficient log form that allows one thread to notify the other thread of the completion, of the release of the lock, and the threads get into the queue by adding an element into an ordered list. So I'm just wondering why you prefer a ticket log over MCS log. It's fine.
Okay, I wonder how. So, question would be how you can actually implement the log in an RDMA context. As well.
Sure.
So,
yes.
So I guess we can take that question offline. I want to discuss that more.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Ready? All right. Thank you again.
Thank you.